Aisha Thompson stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway of her Brooklyn apartment, clutching her mother's hospital bill, her heart sinking as the numbers blurred through her tears. At 28, she had given up her dreams of a linguistics degree to care for her diabetic mother, working nights as a cleaner at Wellington Industries. That evening, as she slipped in her navy blue uniform, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "You're stronger than you know, Aisha. Keep going." Those words clung to her as she stepped into the cold Manhattan night, unaware that her life was about to change forever. On the 45th floor of Wellington Industries, David Wellington's voice boomed through his glass office, his face red with panic. His sharp-tongued executive assistant, clutched her phone, her voice tight. "I've called every translator in the city, David. No one's available for a meeting this big on such short notice." David loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. 20 years of building his empire, and now a language barrier could ruin it all. The Chinese were strict about communication. Apps or gestures wouldn't do. In the corner, Aisha paused her cleaning, her mop still as she overheard the chaos. She'd been invisible for 3 years, wiping down boardrooms while executives plotted million-dollar deals. But she wasn't just a cleaner. She spoke Mandarin, Cantonese, and some Hokkien, skills honed at Howard University before life forced her to drop out. Her heart raced. Should she speak up? She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me, Mr. Wellington. I speak fluent Mandarin." The room fell silent, the hum of the air conditioning deafening. Rebecca let out a sharp laugh. "Aisha, this isn't a joke. This is a multi-million-dollar deal." David turned, his eyes narrowing. "You speak Mandarin?" he asked, his voice thick with doubt. Aisha met his gaze, steady despite her nerves. "Mandarin, Cantonese, and some Hokkien. I studied East Asian linguistics before I started here." Rebecca's laugh turned cold. "David, you can't be serious. A cleaner in a meeting with Chinese executives?" But David, desperate, ignored her. "Prove it," he said. Aisha nodded, her voice calm as she spoke in flawless Mandarin. "It's an honor to meet you here, and we hope our cooperation brings mutual success." David's jaw tightened. He didn't understand the words, but her confidence was undeniable. "What did you say?" he asked. Aisha translated. "It's a respectful business greeting in Chinese culture." Rebecca crossed her arms, her face sour. "What will the Chinese think when they see a cleaner in an executive meeting?" Aisha's mind flashed to 6 months ago, when she'd overheard Rebecca in the bathroom, sneering about that black girl who hangs around important meetings. Aisha had stayed silent then, but the memory stung. David studied Aisha, seeing something, maybe her quiet strength, that made him pause. "You have 20 minutes to get ready," he said, ignoring Rebecca's glare. "Find something appropriate and meet me in the conference room." As Aisha rushed to change, Rebecca hissed, "You're insane, David. This will ruin your career." But David wasn't listening. Aisha, meanwhile, felt a spark of hope. For 3 years, she'd cleaned these offices, absorbing every word, every strategy, every mistake, especially Rebecca's. She'd heard Rebecca lie to clients, take credit for others' work, and dismiss employees she deemed unfit. Aisha had stayed invisible, but she'd been watching, learning, waiting. Now, her moment was here, and she wasn't just stepping into a meeting, she was stepping into a chance to rewrite her future. Aisha hurried down the hallway, her heart pounding as she clutched the black blazer she'd borrowed from the receptionist. In the small break room, she changed out of her cleaning uniform, her hands trembling. The mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, no longer just a cleaner, but someone about to sit with executives. She tied her hair into a neat bun, took a deep breath, and whispered her mother's words, "You're stronger than you know." With only minutes to spare, she grabbed a notepad and headed to the conference room, her steps steady despite the knot in her stomach. The room was already buzzing when Aisha arrived. 5 Chinese executives, dressed in sharp suits, chatted in Mandarin, their voices calm but precise. David stood at the head of the table, his face tense, while Rebecca sat with a forced smile, her eyes darting to Aisha with barely hidden scorn. The CFO, Thomas, muttered, "Is that really her?" as Aisha took her seat. David cleared his throat and introduced her carefully. "This is Aisha Thompson, our specialist for Asian markets." He avoided mentioning her real job, but the air felt heavy with unspoken judgment. Aisha bowed slightly to Mr. Chun, the delegation leader, and spoke in perfect Mandarin, welcoming them with warmth and praising their punctuality, a detail she knew mattered in their culture. Mr. Chen's eyes widened, and he returned a respectful nod, clearly impressed. For the first 15 minutes, Aisha translated with ease, catching every nuance, every subtle joke, making the Chinese laugh naturally. The room relaxed, and even David's shoulders loosened. She wasn't just translating words, she was bridging cultures, making the deal feel possible. Then Rebecca leaned forward, her smile sharp. "Aisha, why don't you share your unique journey with our guests?" Her tone dripped with condescension. David shot her a warning look, but Rebecca pressed on. "It's so inspiring, how you've reinvented yourself." Aisha's chest tightened. She remembered being 18, dropping out of Howard University to pay her mother's medical bills, the shame of taking a cleaning job to survive. But she kept her face calm. "Life brings unexpected paths," she said, her voice steady. "But it's taught me to value every opportunity." She turned to the Chinese, translating her words into Mandarin, adding, "Our company believes in finding talent in all places." The room went quiet. Mr. Chen's expression shifted, not to disdain, but to confusion. In Chinese culture, roles were rigid, and Rebecca's jab had made Aisha seem less credible. The ease in the room faded. The executives' glances grew guarded. Aisha felt their respect slip, and her stomach churned. She was no longer a specialist, just a curiosity. David jumped in, his voice firm. "What Rebecca means is we value skill, no matter where it comes from." But the damage was done. Aisha kept translating, her voice steady, but inside, she burned. For 3 years, she'd cleaned these rooms, listening to Rebecca's lies, fudging sales numbers, stealing credit, sidelining employees she didn't like. Aisha had seen it all, and now Rebecca thought she could humiliate her in front of everyone. But Aisha wasn't done. She'd been invisible too long, and every word, every slight, was fuel for what was coming next. The meeting limped to a close, the Chinese delegation offering polite smiles but vague promises. "We'll review the proposal carefully," Mr. Chun said in Mandarin, his tone diplomatic but distant, a code for hesitation. Aisha translated his words, her voice steady despite the sinking feeling in her chest. As the executives filed out, Rebecca gathered her papers with a smug grin. "Well, that was a mess," she said loudly, glancing at Aisha. "Maybe next time we'll stick to professionals." David's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the departing guests. Aisha returned to the break room, slipping back into her cleaning uniform. Her hands moved automatically, pushing the cart down the hall, but her mind was racing. 3 years of overhearing secrets had taught her more than any business school could. She'd heard Rebecca twist numbers to impress clients, take credit for projects she barely touched, and once whisper about sabotaging a deal with a black-owned firm. Aisha had kept quiet, but she'd kept notes, mental ones at first, then written in a small notebook she hid at home. As she wiped down a conference table, Rebecca's voice echoed from the hallway. "Back where she belongs," she said to Jennifer from accounting, loud enough for Aisha to hear. David actually thought a cleaner could save a $200 million deal. Pathetic. Aisha's grip tightened on the cloth, but she kept working, her face blank. Then her phone vibrated. A text in Mandarin from an unknown number. "Ms. Thompson, this is Mr. Chun. Can we meet tomorrow at 10 a.m., Mandarin Cafe, 42nd Street? I have a proposal." Her heart skipped. This wasn't just about translation. It was something bigger. That night, in her small Brooklyn apartment, Aisha sat at her kitchen table, the notebook open in front of her. Pages filled with dates, names, and details. Rebecca's lies, her shady deals, her whispered prejudice. Aisha hadn't planned to use it, but every slight, every insult had pushed her closer to this moment. She remembered her mother's words. Patience is a smart woman's weapon. Aisha closed the notebook, her resolve hardening. Tomorrow, she'd meet Mr. Chun, not as a cleaner, but as someone ready to claim her place. The next morning, Aisha arrived at Mandarin Cafe in a simple dress she'd saved up for, her nerves buzzing but her posture calm. Mr. Chun sat with a woman, Lisa Wong, who introduced herself as the Vice President of International Development. Ms. Thompson, Mr. Chun began in Mandarin, your fluency impressed me, but your composure under pressure was remarkable. Lisa leaned forward. We're expanding in North America. We need someone who knows both Chinese culture and American business, someone who's seen the real game from the inside. Aisha's pulse quickened. I've watched how things work for years, she said, choosing her words carefully. I know what drives success and what causes failure. Mr. Chun smiled. We also need help investigating discrepancies in Wellington's contracts. There's evidence of unethical practices. He slid a business card across the table. Thompson Consulting, International Specialist. The salary listed was 5 times her cleaning pay. Aisha's hand stayed steady, but inside, she felt a spark of possibility. Rebecca had tried to break her, but she'd only built her stronger. Aisha left the Mandarin Cafe, her mind spinning with the weight of Mr. Chen's offer. The business card felt heavy in her pocket, a promise of a future she'd never dared imagine. But as she walked through Manhattan's crowded streets, doubt crept in. Could she really step into this world? She'd spent years being invisible, dismissed by people like Rebecca. Yet, the notebook at home, her secret weapon, held proof of Rebecca's lies. Aisha's steps quickened. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every moment she'd been ignored. Back at Wellington Industries, the air was thick with tension. David had called an emergency board meeting after the Chinese delegation sent a formal complaint about contract irregularities. Rebecca strode into the boardroom, her red suit sharp, her confidence unshaken. This is about yesterday's disaster, she said, addressing the 7 board members. I warned David that trusting an unqualified cleaner was reckless. Now we're losing $200 million. Her voice dripped with blame, her eyes flicking to David, who sat stone-faced. The door opened quietly, and Aisha entered, wearing a crisp gray suit she'd bought with her savings. She carried a leather briefcase, her posture calm but commanding. Rebecca's face twisted. Why is she here? She snapped. David's voice was cold. The Chinese requested her presence to address their concerns. Aisha set her laptop on the table, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Mr. Chun raised issues about unethical practices in our contracts, she said, her tone even. I have evidence to clarify. Rebecca laughed, sharp and bitter. Evidence? From a cleaner. Aisha ignored her, connecting her laptop to the projector. The screen lit up with an email from Rebecca to a client, leaking a competitor's confidential bid. The room went silent. This email, Aisha said, shows Rebecca sharing private information to sabotage a black-owned company's deal. The board members leaned forward, their faces grim. Rebecca's smile vanished. This is fake, she shouted. She's making it up to get revenge. Aisha didn't flinch. This next document, she continued, shows Rebecca inflating project costs to cancel deals led by minority employees, then blaming their incompetence. Spreadsheets flashed on the screen, alongside call logs from the security system. For 3 years, Aisha had collected every slip, every lie, every whispered insult. The boardroom felt like it was holding its breath. Mr. Johnson, a black director, spoke up, his voice low. Rebecca, is this true? She stammered, sweat on her brow. It's out of context. You don't get the pressure I'm under. Aisha played a recording, Rebecca's voice clear through the speakers. We can't let these people think they belong in executive rooms. The board gasped. Aisha's eyes met Rebecca's, steady and unyielding. This was 8 months ago, she said. And 2 weeks ago, Rebecca told the receptionist to lose resumes with ethnic names. Rebecca's face went pale. She'd thought Aisha was nothing, but Aisha had been listening, waiting, building a case that could unravel her entire career. The boardroom was silent, the weight of Aisha's evidence pressing down on everyone. Rebecca stood, her face pale, her hands shaking as she tried to speak. "This is a lie," she stammered, her voice cracking. "She's twisting everything." But the board members' faces told a different story: disgust, anger, disbelief. David leaned forward, his voice like ice. "Rebecca, you have 30 seconds to explain why you shouldn't be fired and reported to the authorities." Rebecca's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, but found none. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's just a cleaner." David's gaze didn't waver. "She's our new director of international relations. You're done." The words hit like a hammer. Rebecca swayed, her career crumbling in seconds. "Security will escort you out," David added. "And we're sending this evidence to the federal attorney." As two guards stepped forward, Rebecca shot Aisha a look of pure venom. "You think you've won?" she hissed. Aisha met her eyes, calm and steady. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to do what's right." Rebecca was led away, her heels clicking faintly down the hall. Aisha's heart raced, but she kept her face composed. The board members murmured, some nodding in approval, others still processing the shock. Mr. Johnson, the black director, spoke up. "Aisha, how did you gather all this?" She took a breath, her voice soft but clear. "When you're invisible, people talk like you're not there." I listened. I remembered. I wrote it down. David shook his head, half in awe. 3 years of evidence. "You've been planning this." Aisha shook her head. "Not planning. Preparing. For a chance." Later, in her small apartment, Aisha sat with her mother's picture, the hospital bill pinned to the fridge. She called her mom, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mom, you said patience is a weapon. I get it now." Her mother's laugh was warm through the phone. "I knew you'd find your moment, baby." Aisha smiled, tears in her eyes. She'd faced Rebecca's cruelty, the board's doubt, and her own fears, but she'd stood tall. The business card from Mr. Chun lay on the table, a reminder of the door now open to her. The next day, Aisha returned to Wellington Industries, no longer in a borrowed suit, but one she'd chosen herself. The hallways felt different, not because the building had changed, but because she had. Young employees nodded to her, their eyes curious, some admiring. Jennifer, now her assistant, whispered, "They're all talking about you." Aisha shrugged, but inside, she felt a quiet pride. She turned 3 years of being unseen into a weapon sharper than Rebecca's arrogance. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a fight she was ready to win. 6 months later, Aisha sat in her new office on the 38th floor of Wellington Industries, the Manhattan skyline stretching out before her. Her glass desk was covered with contracts in Mandarin, Cantonese, and English, deals that had brought in $400 million in new business. She'd tripled the company's Asian market share, and her name was now whispered with respect in boardrooms. Jennifer, her assistant, knocked softly. "The South Korean delegation's here. They're excited to meet the woman who's shaking up international trade." Aisha nodded, adjusting her navy blazer, a choice that felt like a nod to her past, not a chain to it. Her new role as Director of International Relations came with a $300,000 salary, enough to cover her mother's medical bills and enroll in an executive master's program at Columbia. She'd move her mom to a better hospital, and every night they talked, her mother's voice full of pride. "You showed them, Aisha," she'd say. "You showed them all." But Aisha didn't feel like she'd won a war, just a battle. The real victory was building something bigger than herself, something that proved talent didn't care about titles or uniforms. Across town, Rebecca sat in a cramped Queens apartment, her life a shadow of what it had been. Piles of rejection letters from job applications cluttered her table, next to bills for therapy she could barely afford. The federal investigation into her actions at Wellington had hit hard, a $50,000 fine and a 5-year ban from executive roles in companies with federal contracts. Her name was poison in the industry, splashed across business headlines as a cautionary tale of toxic leadership. That morning, she'd seen Aisha's face on the cover of Business Week, smiling with Chinese executives under the headline, the translator who redefined global business. The sting was sharp, like a knife twisting in her chest. Back at Wellington, David called a board meeting to announce the semester's record-breaking results. Aisha didn't just save our Chinese deal, he said, his voice steady but warm. She opened markets we never dreamed of touching. Mr. Johnson stood, his eyes gleaming. In 40 years, I've never seen someone turn the tables like Aisha. She's proof that talent doesn't need a fancy office to shine. The room erupted in applause, and Aisha sat quietly, her mind drifting to the nights she'd scrubbed those same floors, invisible to the people now clapping for her. That evening, Aisha got a call from her mother. "I saw you on TV, honey. Talking about second chances. You made me cry." Aisha laughed, her throat tight. "I learned from you, Mom. You said nobody can take away what I know." On the news, Aisha had been asked about Rebecca. Her answer was simple but sharp. "She taught me what not to be. Real power lifts people up, not pushes them down." The words had spread online, shared by thousands who saw her as a symbol of grit and grace. Aisha wasn't chasing revenge. She was chasing a legacy, one built on truth and hard-earned strength. Aisha stood at the podium of Howard University, her alma mater, facing a crowd of 500 students, their eyes fixed on her. She'd returned to announce the Second Chance Scholarship, a program she'd funded with part of her salary to help low-income students who'd had to pause their dreams, just like she had. "Nobody should choose between family and a future," she said, her voice steady but warm. "This is for those who keep going, no matter what." The crowd erupted in cheers, some students wiping tears. Aisha's heart swelled. She wasn't just giving money, she was giving hope. Backstage, a young student, Maya, approached her, clutching a notebook. "Ms. Thompson, I'm studying linguistics because of you," she said, her voice shaking. "I heard your story on TV." Aisha smiled, remembering her own days at Howard, studying late into the night before life pulled her away. "Keep that notebook close," she told Maya. "It might save you one day." Maya nodded, her eyes bright with determination. Aisha felt a pang of pride. This was why she'd fought, why she'd endured Rebecca's sneers. Meanwhile, in her Queens apartment, Rebecca sat alone, her laptop open to a live stream of Aisha's speech. The words stung, each one a reminder of her own fall. She lost everything: her job, her status, her confidence. The headlines had been brutal, calling her a symbol of corporate greed and prejudice. Therapy helped, but it couldn't erase the regret that hit her now, watching Aisha shine. For the first time, Rebecca's tears weren't for herself, but for the harm she'd caused. She closed the laptop, her hands trembling, wondering if she'd ever find a way back. At Wellington Industries, Aisha's influence grew. She mentored 5 young employees from operational roles, spotting potential where others saw none. One, a quiet IT worker named Jamal, had ideas for streamlining contracts, but his managers had ignored him. Aisha listened, gave him a chance, and now his system was saving the company millions. "You saw something in me," Jamal told her one day, his voice thick with gratitude. Aisha shrugged. "I just saw what was already there." Her office was now a hub for new ideas, a place where people like her, overlooked, underestimated, found a voice. That afternoon, David called her into his office. "Forbes wants to interview you," he said, a rare smile breaking through. "They're calling you one of the most influential young executives in the country." Aisha laughed softly, still adjusting to her new reality. "I just did what I had to," she said. David shook his head. "You did more than that. You changed this company." He paused, his voice lowering. "Why didn't you destroy Rebecca completely? You had enough to ruin her life, not just her job." Aisha's eyes softened. "Hurting her wouldn't build anything. I wanted to create, not destroy." Later, Aisha sat in her new Upper East Side apartment, the city lights glowing outside. She called her mother, her voice steady but emotional. "Mom, I'm giving others the chance I almost lost." Her mother's voice cracked with pride. "You're not just my daughter. You're a light for so many." Aisha hung up, her gaze on the skyline. Rebecca had tried to dim her, but every insult had only made her sharper, stronger. Now, Aisha was ready for the final step, not just to rise, but to redefine what power could mean. Aisha walked into Wellington Industries' boardroom 1 year after that fateful meeting, her presence commanding respect. The room, once a place where she'd scrub floors, now buzzed with anticipation for her presentation. She'd been named one of Forbes' top young executives, and her work had secured $500 million in new contracts across Asia. Today, she was unveiling a mentorship program to lift up overlooked talent within the company. "Everyone deserves a chance to be seen," she said, her voice clear and warm. The board applauded, and Mr. Johnson, the black director, gave her a nod, his eyes proud. Young employees crowded her office daily, seeking advice. Aisha mentored them with the same patience her mother had taught her, spotting potential in places others ignored. One, a janitor named Carlos, had a knack for logistics. Aisha gave him a project, and within months, he was leading a team. "You changed my life," he told her, his voice thick. Aisha smiled. "You did that yourself. I just opened the door." Her second-chance scholarship at Howard had grown, funding 50 students, and she'd started a foundation to support minority-led businesses, pouring her own money into it. Across town, Rebecca sat in a community center, attending a job retraining program. Her fall had been hard. Evicted from her condo, shunned by the industry, her name a warning in corporate circles. She'd spent months in therapy, grappling with her mistakes. Watching Aisha's Forbes interview online, Rebecca felt a mix of envy and regret. Aisha had said, "Real strength isn't about pushing others down. It's about building them up." Those words hit Rebecca like a mirror, forcing her to face the person she'd been. She enrolled in the program, hoping to rebuild, but the road was long, and she knew it. Back at Wellington, David called Aisha into his office. "You've changed the game," he said, his voice heavy with respect. "This company's stronger because of you." Aisha nodded, but her mind was on her mother, who'd watched her latest TV interview from her new hospital room, tears in her eyes. "You're my hero," her mom had said. Aisha's throat tightened at the memory. "I learned from the best," she replied. That night, in her Upper East Side apartment, Aisha looked out at the skyline, the city no longer a distant dream, but a place she'd claimed. The lesson wasn't just Aisha's rise. It was the power of patience and preparation. For 3 years, she'd been invisible, soaking up every word, every mistake, every lie. Rebecca's cruelty had forged her, not broken her. Aisha didn't destroy Rebecca. She built a legacy instead, proving that true power comes from lifting others, not crushing them. Her story spread, inspiring thousands, students, workers, dreamers, who saw in her what they could become. As she prepared for a meeting with Japanese investors, Aisha smiled, knowing her mother's words had been right. Nobody can dim what you know. The moral was clear: talent, grit, and dignity always find a way to shine, no matter how long they're hidden.